See this? Jonathan Swift. I didn't have to clear a park either for it, huh? Just came in here and did it. All right, we need to talk about chapter 1. What better place than in this holy sanctuary of Jonathan Swift books, huh? So I cleared the office of all the rabble. We can talk about chapter 1. Very short little video. I'm sorry, book 1, The Voyage to Lilliput. Very short little video about chapter 1 and 2, so we can skip it and get on to the juicy stuff. Not that we are not skipping a little juicy stuff, and I mean juicy stuff in the first part. So as I said in the others, in class or in the first video, if you had to watch that, the first chapter of The Voyage to Lilliput talks about why he went to sea, economic troubles, proves that he's viable and can be trusted with his tale, and he ends up shipwrecked, lands on the beach, and is awoken to being tied down. Okay, and the things that we want to just mention here is he talks about the fact that they wheel him into the Lilliput in the main city in the capital, and they chain him to a temple. Okay, now he uses the word temple. In England, they obviously would be churches or cathedrals. Okay, and in the last paragraph of the first chapter, they talk about the fact that they chain him to a temple in which an ancient temple that was polluted some years before by an unnatural murder. Okay, well, what he's referring to is the murder of Thomas Becket, and that murder in 1170 made Thomas Becket a saint and a martyr, and it was done in church. A king told a few of his most loyal knights, "Boy, that guy's really getting on my nerves. I wish he were gone." And they thought that he was doing the wink wink and the nod nod, and they got on their little horses and they rode 50 miles down to Canterbury, kicked in the door while the poor man was praying, and whacked him upside the head so many times with a sword that his brain popped out all over the church floor. True story. And if you go there today, you can see right where it happened, right, and read all the gruesome details. But that's a big no-no in Christianity, whacking somebody in a church. Okay, and then of course there was another unholy killing, and it's a veiled reference to the execution of the King Charles I in 1649. By the way, he was drawn, quartered, and I think he was drawn and quartered. He definitely was beheaded. They might not have done the other gruesome things because he was a king, and kings are important. Remember that Swift being a Tory, you may not like the king, but by God, you don't cut the king's head off. If you need a good understanding of the importance of royalty and the importance of being a king and why England is better than the United States and why the king is more important than the president, I suggest you get on YouTube and look up English Bob from The Unforgiven and the King. And that should pull up the great scene in that American classic from 1992. It's a good one. If you guys are good, we can watch in class. So that is where we leave off with chapter 1. A lot of rigmarole about how he got there, waking up, all these little people going through his pockets, all that stuff. That's a bit of Swift complaining about the fact that in this world of non-political freedoms, and person could be searched. He actually was searched to the point where they actually went through his toilet in his house and looking for papers, and he was mortified that anybody would go through another man's toilet. I do believe, if I remember the story correctly, the stuff they were looking for was in the toilet. So anyway, this leads me to part 2, chapter 2, where he wakes up, okay, and there's a bit of a description here that is quite stunning. I'll just read it. It says, "I had been for some hours extremely pressed by the necessities of nature, which was no wonder, it being almost 2 days since I had last disburthened myself." Now there's a word. Swift was a big linguist anyway. "I was under great difficulties between urgency and shame. The best expedient I could think on was to creep into my house, It's a church, okay? Which I accordingly did. And shutting the gate after me, the giant doors, I went as far as the length of chain would suffer and discharged my body of that uneasy load in a church. But this was the only time I was ever guilty of so uncleanly an action, for which I cannot but hope the candid reader, that's you, will give some allowance, forgive me, after he hath maturely and impartially considered my case and the distress I was in. From this time, my constant practice was, as soon as I rose, to perform that business in open air at the full extent of my chain, and due care was taken every morning before company came that the offensive matter should be carried away off in wheelbarrows by 2 servants for that appointed purpose. Now, imagine getting that job, right? He's 6 foot, you're 6 inches, and you've got a wheelbarrow. Anyway, so that is a scene which is rather appalling. There is quite a bit of urination and defecation in this book, quite a bit. In fact, in the island of the Winhams, when he washes up on the island of the horses, the first thing that happens to him is he is hit in the head with human excrement thrown at him from the trees. There are social scientists who believe that he suffered from, bodily function phobia. There's a big fancy word for it. It would have been good if I looked it up, but I didn't. And then there is the idea that he is being hypercritical of, okay, very critical of the lack of cleanliness in his time, okay? And I was hoping I could find it, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, all right? There is... It was a very dirty time, and it's a very interesting time. It's the Age of Enlightenment. We're coming up with crazy things like life, liberty, and happiness. People, all equality, all men are created equal, but we hadn't come up with the toilet yet, okay? The flushing toilet is not yet available for all. We're still oftentimes throwing our bodily waste into cesspools, the street, so on and so forth. Very dirty, very unhealthy. And so that being said, the... part of it is his belief that he's just pointing out just how filthy this time period was. Some people believe he had a phobia. I've read that more than one occasion. So take it for what it's worth. The other thing that goes on here is on 47, again, chapter 1, he meets the king, and the king comes and he says stuff to the king, and the king says stuff back to him. But he says, His Imperial Majesty spoke often to me, and I returned answers, but neither of us could understand a syllable. Well, as mentioned probably in class or in the other video, the king in 1726, when this book was written, was a King George I who spoke no English, all right? And he, if you wanted anything to do with the king, you had to deal with his new guy called the Prime Minister, which was Robert Walpole, or in this book, Flimnap, okay? Swift, being a linguist, has lots of fun with words and names and such, okay? And so I want you to remember when you're reading through here, he is attacking the court of King James I. So every ridicule of the monarchy in Lilliput is actually a reflection of what he thinks is appalling in England, okay? Again, remembering he is a Tory, and the party in charge were the Whigs, okay? The liberals versus conservatives. And the George I was a Protestant, okay, which was a rule they had by then, I do believe. I know it is now. After they cut the Catholic king's head off in 1649, Charles I, they came up with a law that you had to be a Protestant. I take that back. It comes after James I. Because what you had right now in England at this time, George was Protestant, and the guy who thought he should be on the crown, or on the throne, was a James I, often called the Pretender. James, his followers, were called Jacobites, okay? And you'll see that word in the 1700s. But a Jacobite means you're following James I, which means you're in favor of the Catholic king. And so he's the Pretender. But the English politics of this time are a mess, right? You got the prime minister is born out of the fact that your German king of England is not speaking English. He brought over his son, who was the heir to the throne, also German, who hated his dad because his dad had his mom's friend mysteriously disappear. All kinds of just soap opera things going on there. And of course he had his two mistresses. So he was busy, too busy to learn English. And this is the mess that's going on when he gets to the court of Lilliput. And so I have you skipping chapter 2 just because there's a lot of stuff going on with him being searched, going through his pockets. This is his anger at being suspicious or being suspicioned in his own home. And we're picking up basically on chapter 3, where he starts talking about the political appointments that happen in the island of Lilliput, which are hilarious. So you will be reading 3, 4, 5, and 6, and stopping on the page, chapter 6, at the end of the Utopian section. It's about a total of 20-some pages, okay? And follow the instructions that are on the website on exactly what I'd like you to do with those pieces. And get a laugh out of it. Try that, a laugh. See ya.